Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to this week's Focus Israel Report. In this week's report, we're going to be sharing with you regarding the current status of the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And it is as follows. Israel started Operation Protective Edge on July the 8th against the Palestinian terror organization Hamas in the Gaza Strip after Hamas launched a barrage of rockets from a sophisticated network of tunnels against Israeli citizens in various parts of the land of Israel. Over the past 5 years, about 16,000 men, which is around 15% of Hamas's fighting strength, were assigned to build the tunnel network. Israel's Southern Command Chief, Sami Turgeman, said, "With the amount of concrete Hamas poured into the tunnel project, 2 hospitals, 20 schools, 20 healthcare centers, and 100 kindergartens could have been built," he said. For the first 10 days, Israel launched airstrikes seeking to destroy those elaborate network of tunnels built by Hamas to wage war against Israel. However, in order to do the job more completely, Israel sent its army into the Gaza Strip. Hamas started the war with about 10,000 rockets. Since the start of fighting, Hamas has fired over 3,300 rockets at Israel. Of those, 116 hit populated areas inside Israel. About 600 Hamas rockets that were fired at Israel were launched from schools, hospitals, civilian areas, cemeteries, and religious sites. The Israeli military has responded with striking over 4,700 terror sites in the Gaza Strip, including rocket launching sites, command and control centers, weapons storage and manufacturing facilities, training and militant compounds, and militant wing government facilities. The goal of the Israeli military campaign is to restore sustained quiet to Israel's citizens while dealing a harsh blow to Hamas's terrorist infrastructure. Through targeted airstrikes, the Israeli army has destroyed about 1/3 of the Hamas rocket arsenal. Therefore, about 1/3 of the initial Hamas inventory of rockets are still in their control. Through these efforts, the Israeli military has neutralized about 32 Hamas terror tunnels. They have targeted over 1,000 militants associated with Hamas. Israel has used over 82,000 reserve duty personnel for this operation. 64 Israeli soldiers have been killed in combat. 463 have been wounded. Israel has supplied over 40,000 tons of humanitarian aid to the Gaza, including food and medical supplies. In response to the initial Israeli attacks upon the Gaza Strip, U.S. President Barack Obama called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Ultimately, Israel agreed to a humanitarian ceasefire. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, along with United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, gave assurances to Israel that Hamas and the other terrorist organizations in Gaza had agreed to the ceasefire. However, after the humanitarian ceasefire was to have taken place, Hamas attacked and killed 2 Israeli soldiers. As a result, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that Hamas and the other terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip will bear the consequences of their actions. Israel will take all necessary steps against those who call for its destruction and perpetuates terrorism against its citizens, Netanyahu told Kerry. After Hamas broke the ceasefire agreement, Netanyahu said that he would not accept any future ceasefire proposal that does not allow the Israeli army to complete the destruction of the Hamas terror tunnels. As of now, we have neutralized dozens of terrorist tunnels, and we are determined to complete this mission, with or without a ceasefire, Netanyahu said. Therefore, I will not agree to any proposal that does not allow the Israeli army to complete this work, which is important for the security of Israel's citizens. In any event, After the initial Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza and after ground troops invaded to neutralize Hamas's terror tunnels, the Israeli army withdrew their forces from the Gaza Strip. In practical terms, Israeli troops will regroup and spread out along the border as a barrier against future Hamas attempts to keep up its terror offensive by means of cross-border commando raids using undiscovered tunnels and firing rockets and mortars into Israel. Israel's war planners believe that the positioning of the Israeli army outside the Gaza border is capable of repelling any Hamas assaults by means of tank and artillery fire and Air Force drones. A senior Israeli army official said that Israel did not take over the Gaza Strip or work to completely destroy Hamas in order to leave an organization in power that would have to answer for terrorism in the Strip. He said that if the Israeli objective was to take down Hamas, Israel could have easily taken over the Gaza Strip within 10 days. And taken another year or two to search for and destroy the terror infrastructure. This wasn't the essence of our mission, he said. The objective is to change the reality from its very core so we don't have mutual fire in 2 months. We need to have a balance of hope for the citizens in the Gaza Strip and a balance of security for the citizens of Israel. After withdrawing their ground troops from the Gaza, Israel agreed to another ceasefire with Hamas. Egypt was in charge of mediation efforts. As a result, representatives of the Palestinian factions in Gaza arrived in Cairo to present a united front on negotiations for a ceasefire. According to one Palestinian delegation member, their draft demands include the following. Number 1, an Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Number 2, an end to the Gaza blockade and opening of crossings for people and merchandise. Number 3, extend the freedom of movement for sailors to 12 nautical miles. Number 4, canceling the safety strip around the Gaza border. Number 5, establishment of an airport and a seaport in Gaza. Number 6, rehabilitation of the Strip and a promise of emergency aid with the help of an international committee of donors to be convened by the Palestinian Unity Government. And number 7, the release of the 4th wave of Palestinian security detainees originally promised by Israel to the Palestinian Authority. The Israeli proposal for an enduring ceasefire included the following. Number 1, restrict Palestinian brigades in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank to bearing light firearms. Number 2, grant the Israeli military the freedom of action to strike a tunnel system designed for terrorist attacks and demolish plant manufacturing missiles. Number 3, an inspection mechanism which will be set up to monitor the 1 to 3 kilometer deep security belt Israel is carving out inside the Gaza Strip along the 75 kilometers of its security border fence. Number 4, Gaza will not be allowed to have either an airport or a deep water port as Hamas is demanding. Number 5, all reconstruction work in the Gaza Strip or repairing the war damage, whether by the international community or Israel, will be channeled through the Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas. Number 6, all of Gaza's border crossings will be manned and operated by Palestinian Authority security personnel. Egypt and Israel have submitted this demand with regard to both their border terminals. And number 7, Gaza reconstruction work will take place under international supervision. An Egyptian security official said the Palestinian delegation's stance had hardened after the arrival in Cairo of Hamas and Islamic Jihad leaders from the Gaza Strip. One of the main speakers, Hamas spokesman Masher al-Masri, urged the Palestinian representatives in Egypt, "Don't come back without our conditions and demands. Work to get them by all your might in spite of the occupation. We support the resistance. We support the military wing, Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades. We support more firing at Tel Aviv, and we support the terror tunnels," he said. Furthermore, Abu Abeda, spokesman of Hamas's military wing, announced his movement had acquired new rockets with larger warheads than the more than 3,000 fired against the Israeli population in the month-long conflict, and they would be aimed at Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport. Israel would be severed from its air transport ties with the outside world, he said. According to the various sources, the ceasefire discussions in Egypt have thus far failed to achieve real progress. Israel Finance Minister Yair Lapid, a member of the 8-person Israeli Security Cabinet, said the gaps between Israel and Hamas holding indirect talks in Cairo were wide. Lapid said that Israel was dealing with a murderous terror organization that wants to kill Jews, and it will be impossible to move forward unless the security of the communities in the south is secured. Furthermore, Israeli sources said that Hamas and Islamic Jihad have also rejected Israel's demands that they be disarmed as part of a ceasefire agreement. A senior Hamas official, Musa Abu Marzouk, said that the first ceasefire with Israel passed without achieving Hamas's demands. As a result, this is the second and final ceasefire attempt. An Israeli official also said that there was no real progress in the talks with Hamas, saying that there are wide gaps in the negotiations. Hamas's military wing, the Al-Qassam Brigades, released a statement presenting its position in the ongoing talks being held in Egypt. The warriors in Gaza are waiting with Allah's help to renew the fighting or to return to planning the next campaign against Israel. There's no escape, either jihad or planning for the next jihad, declared the statement. These remarks leave no doubt that even in the case of a ceasefire, from Hamas's perspective, the lull in fighting would only be an opportunity to rearm for the next terror war against Israel. As a result, Yahya Musa, a senior Hamas official in the Gaza Strip, said that his movement was preparing for a long battle with Israel. Assam al-Ahmed, the head of the Palestinian Authority delegation in Cairo, said the following regarding the position of Hamas in the talks. I'm still not sure that there's a decision by Hamas to end this war with Israel. Therefore, the Palestinian team is in no shape to hold practical negotiations in any sort of resolution in the Gaza because it is deeply divided in two ways. Number one, Hamas rejects the Palestinian Authority group as not fit to represent its interests because they say Palestinian Chairman Mahmoud Abbas is locked onto the Egyptian views. Number two, the Hamas team itself was split between the envoys from Gaza and some of their leaders from Qatar. The Gaza group want the Cairo talks to lead off by setting conditions for a prolonged ceasefire during which their political and military demands would be negotiated. The Qatar envoys insist on reversing this order. First, agreed solutions for the long term, and only then a deal for extending the ceasefire. Israel has been criticized by the international community for using disproportionate force against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Therefore, Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained a moral justification for the way in which the Israeli army has dealt with the Hamas strategy of firing rockets at Israel and tunneling under the Israeli border from the heart of Palestinian residential neighborhoods in the Gaza, arguing that Israel's battle over the past month against terrorists in Gaza using civilians as human shields, he said, would be a moral mistake as well as a practical one to not take action against terrorists operating from mosques, schools, and other civilian areas. Netanyahu blamed Hamas for Gaza's civilian deaths due to its rejection of various ceasefire proposals throughout the campaign and its deliberate basing of its military infrastructure in the heart of Gaza population centers. Well, that's going to conclude this week's report, where we shared with you regarding the current status of the conflict between Hamas and Israel in the Gaza Strip. Until we do it again, Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.